Did you know that a scream can change your life? I found that out the hard way when I was fixing the shingles on my roof 2 years ago. It turns out that my daughter, Krista, was just fighting with one of her friends over a Barbie doll. The scuffle was completely forgotten 2 minutes later. But I had no idea what caused that scream. I panicked, slipped, and painted the bricks on the ground below an involuntary hue of red. Associative visual agnosia was the reason I couldn't use a toilet by myself after the fall. I still had all of my motor skills. I just didn't recognize the damn thing in front of me. White, round and smooth could be a shitter or a baby's ass, so I wasn't going to start peeing on the object in question without more information. I could recognize shapes just fine, and I understood ideas as well as I had before. But the blow to my brain damaged the link between sight and concept. My wife, Melanie, was an angel. I rarely think moving on would have been impossible without her. She lived, laughed, and loved right alongside me. But more importantly, she suffered as I did. That's the definition of loneliness, you know. It's not whether you share the good times that determines how alone you are. It's whether your own pain causes someone else to hurt. She suffered, and in doing so, she began to make me whole again. Things weren't the same, not by a long shot. But we created something new, and that thing became normal. The holidays were happy. We had a baby. The baby would grow up knowing me only in my brokenness, and therefore always see me as whole. I insisted on being a person with something broken, not a broken person. I shooed Melanie and Krista away while I cooked the entire Thanksgiving meal by myself. It was a hell of a challenge, but with post-it notes and patience, I made it happen. I was feeling normal again, real again, as I was able, literally, to put food on my family's table. The smell of Thanksgiving filled the air. Krista snuggled up next to Melanie as they watched a movie. I could hear the baby crying gently in the distance. I felt warm and at peace. I was so excited to unveil the Thanksgiving feast. We had a delicious 19.13-pound tom turkey. Warm, fluffy rolls nearly tumbled out of the basket. There was enough thick, rich gravy to coat every morsel, and I made the cranberry sauce from scratch using my grandmother's recipe. I instructed my family to sit down at the table as I presented the turkey, piping hot fresh from the oven. Did you know that a scream can change your life? I had to put the turkey down just to cover my ears. Why were both of them shrieking with such ungodly terror? I looked down at the table. Wait, something was not right. What did that shape mean? Horror slowly dawned upon me. There was a raw turkey in the baby's high chair. I need to get this written down fast. Something is killing my friends, and I don't know if it's human. I've heard the legends that the island has to offer, but I didn't think anything of them until now. I have to believe them, now that one of them is right outside the door of the boat's cabin. My friend Jimmy and I were hosting a party on his yacht. We had anchored right off the coast of a tiny island known as Cranberry Falls in Nova Scotia. This place is full of legends, most of which are pretty freaky. The one that really got to me was the one about man-eating monsters that lurked among normal people. Monsters that couldn't be killed unless they didn't want to die. So, anyways, we were partying on Jimmy's boat. It was actually quite a fun time. We were celebrating Jimmy's 23rd birthday and his graduation from college. The night was pleasantly cool and clear. I've never seen so many stars. The island was almost entirely dark, with only a few lights dotting the rolling hills and massive cliffs. I could have sworn I saw a pale figure walking along the shore, but I rationalized it as my imagination. One of the girls spotted her in the water. The girl, I think her name was Brittany, screamed as if she had seen a ghost. We all rushed over to see what was the matter. We saw her then, the horrific monster. The reason why I am writing this. An ancient woman floated limply in the jet black water. Her skin was as pale and translucent as cold milk, and as thin and wrinkled as discarded wax paper. Her hair was the color of freshly fallen snow, matching her long flowing dress. She looked to be at least 100 years old, but she was oddly beautiful as she drifted in stark contrast with the inky waves. We threw her a lifebelt, not knowing what to do really, and not thinking that she would grab it. But she did, the whole while keeping her eyes closed tight. This surprised us all, and her seemingly iron grip shocked us more. We pulled her up, and her thin frame collapsed onto the deck. Her pale skin looked almost absent in the light, as if she were a mere skeleton. Her head rose, and she opened her eyes. They were a solid matte black. Those dreadful orbs seemed to absorb all the light around. She rose to her feet with a surprising speed, her black eyes locked onto Jimmy, and she tore out his throat. We all stood stunned in the silence, watching as she stripped all of Jimmy's flesh from his body in mere minutes, leaving behind nothing but polished white bones. It wasn't until she looked up, her face covered in blood and bearing razor-sharp teeth, that we all ran. Some of us fled from the boat, trying to swim to shore. Others ran around like decapitated chickens. I hid in the cabin, barring the door and all of the windows. The screams of my friends went on for almost half an hour before they stopped, and then the world fell silent. The only sounds to be heard were the frantic beating of my heart, as well as my hyperventilating. Clearly the old woman heard this because she knocked politely on the door. Why in the hell did she knock politely on the door? When I didn't answer, she easily flung the door open. My jaw dropped. She was no old lady. She entered, one of the sexiest women I've ever seen in my life. Her skin was completely free of wrinkles. Her hair was ash blonde rather than white, and her body filled the dress wonderfully. She didn't have a speck of Jimmy's blood on her, and her eyes were the most beautiful blue I have ever seen. I'm writing this down for no sleep, I said. Do you have a good title idea? I have no freaking idea why I asked her this. Maybe it was the shock. The girl shrugged. How about a fabulous chick ate my buddies? No, a psychopath came up with this title. No. No, wait. That sounds too clickbaitish. How about the simple, elegant, and classy, an old woman ate my friends? I merely nodded. Yeah, I said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry in fear. She walked over to me, reading this. She chuckled when she got to the part where I described her. "Do you think flattery will save you now, boy?" she asked politely. Her voice sounded smooth and ancient, as if it were too old even for the elderly crone. "No," I said meekly. She smiled and then nodded. A Thanksgiving to Forget by No Sleep Theater. It felt like my bladder was going to explode. We had all been in the car for nearly 2 hours, and Dad had refused to stop. When I saw the roof of Aunt Sheila's house peeking over the drive, I nearly jumped out of the car and ran the rest of the way, but Mom stopped me. She wanted me to help carry everything inside. I grabbed the bowl of sweet potatoes, stacked a pie on top, and potty danced my way to the front door. Before Dad could even ring the doorbell, Aunt Sheila burst through the door, arms outstretched, a big grin on her face, and her wide frame taking up the entrance to the house. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," Aunt Sheila shouted, but something seemed off. She looked very happy to see us, but kept looking back over her shoulder into the house. We all greeted her and gave her hugs, but she wouldn't let us in. She looked over her shoulder again, and then back at us. She spoke to us in a hushed, concerned tone. "I need to talk to you guys about Janelle. As you probably heard, her boyfriend Dave died in a car accident a few months ago. She hasn't been taking it well, and has been acting pretty odd." Her words continued, but I couldn't focus. I just nodded along, hopping from foot to foot, not trying to wet my pants. Finally, she opened the door and let us in. I rushed into the house, threw the dishes on the counter, and gave a brief wave to all of my family sitting in the living room before darting to the bathroom. I did take note that Janelle was sitting on the couch with her arm around some guy. Guess she found a way to get over her late boyfriend's death after all. I finished up my business and flushed. As I was washing my hands, I heard faint voices coming from behind me. I turned around and saw a vent. Out of curiosity, I put my ear up to it and heard my father's voice. "What the hell is she doing?" "Calm down, Mark. You know that Janelle always has been a little different." I wondered what they were talking about. Janelle was a kind of black sheep of the family. She went through a goth stage that lasted into her 20s, and I've even heard my parents talk about her being into witchcraft. "Just let Sheila handle it," she said. "She will try to get her help after the holidays." I walked back out into the living room. I wanted to meet the new boyfriend of Janelle's, but they were nowhere to be found. They must have gone off into her room, not something I wanted to walk in on. I proceeded to go through the rest of the standard Thanksgiving festivities while waiting for the food to hit the table. I played football with my little cousins, watched the parade on TV, and got to catch up with everyone I don't get to see often enough. When Aunt Sheila called us all to the table for dinner, Janelle was already there in her seat, and I finally got a good look at this guy she brought to the dinner table, and my jaw dropped. It was Dave, her boyfriend who died in the car crash. He sat there with a blank stare out of his one remaining eye. Where his other eye should have been was a large hole, which also took away most of his cheek and nose. He was dressed in a suit and tie that was covered with dirt. "Kyle, there you are," Janelle called out to me excited. "Where have you been? I don't think you've ever met Dave." I looked over at my dad, who made a gesture of shrugging his shoulders and shaking his head in disbelief at the same time. I rose from my chair and slowly walked over to the happy couple. Hey, Dave. Nice to finally meet you. I was so taken aback by this whole situation, I didn't know how to react. Janelle leaned over to him and put her ear to his mouth. He says he's very happy to finally meet you. He has heard all about you. Sorry, he's pretty shy about talking to new people. No problem. I can understand that, I said uneasily as I made my way back to my seat. Through dinner, we all tried our best to ignore the situation and treat Dave like a living member of the family. My grandmother even tried to have a conversation with him. So, what are you up to these days, Dave? Janelle leaned in to pretend like he was whispering into her ear. He says he has been having trouble finding work since the accident. He was working at his uncle's office, but if he wants that job back, he needs to work the graveyard shift. I just about choked on my mashed potatoes trying not to laugh. I looked over and saw my dad doing the same thing. Probably best to keep your options open for now. Don't want to bury yourself in your work. My mom and grandma both shot daggers at him. I tried my best to stifle my own laughter, but then I had to join in. Dad, seems like quite the find. Where did you dig him up? Janelle didn't pick up on the joke and went right along telling us how they met back in high school and had been inseparable since then. She gave him a tight squeeze and a kiss on his cheek. Well, where his cheek was. As she pulled away, you could see a goopy string of pus or some other such fluid trail from his cheek hole to her lips, and that's when a chunk of flesh fell right off his face and into the untouched turkey and potatoes that sat on the plate in front of him. That was it. We were all done with dinner at that point. A few people had to excuse themselves right there, probably to throw up, I thought. Most of the family left right after that. It was only my parents, Aunt Sheila, Janelle, myself, and of course, Dave. We all retired to the living room and continued to chat. Janelle carried Dave with her, obviously struggling under his weight. Since the accident, Dave has had trouble getting around on his own, she justified. That made sense. He only did have one leg after all, and it was bent the wrong way. She sat Dave down on the couch and climbed up on what remained of his lap and put her arms around his neck. As the conversation went on, I started noticing something on the floor under the happy couple. It was a sort of white mound. Looks like you dropped something. I got up and reached down to pick it up for them before I realized it was maggots. A big pile of maggots that was falling out of Dave's dirty suit. That was enough. I couldn't take any more. I walked over to my parents. I don't feel so well. Can we go home? You are looking pretty pale there, champ. I guess it's about that time, Dad responded. We gathered up our dishes from the sides we brought. Aunt Sheila and Janelle walked us out to the car, gave us hugs, and thanked us for coming. Thanks for having us. Everything was great. Make sure to tell Dave goodbye from us. It was a pleasure meeting him. At that point, a voice came from the front door of the house. I looked over and saw a single eye staring out of the darkness behind the door. It was a pleasure meeting you all too.
Thanksgiving was always my favorite holiday.
I had never eaten turkey outside the end of November, but year after year I gulped it down by the pound for a day, then followed it up with epic portions of green bean casserole and mounds upon mounds of what amounted to sweet potatoes and a shitload of brown sugar and butter. And of course, that was always followed up with at least a half a dozen different types of pie. It wasn't just the food that did it, although there's no denying that feasting like Middle Ages royalty has its charm. Thanksgiving was always more than a normal meal for me. There was a whole atmosphere to it. Waking up early, by my teenage standards, and making snarky comments about parade floats and balloons with my little brother Max. Leaves crunching under our feet as we tossed a football in the crisp autumn air, when we inevitably got kicked out of the house for being in Mom's way. Listening to Pop and Nana tell us the same stories they had last year and the year before, and every year as far back as I can remember. But it didn't matter. Those stories were part of the tradition, and we poked and prodded with questions to make sure we got them all if one of them managed to slip through the cracks. Then Nana got sick last October. Pop followed suit almost immediately. We knew they had to be going downhill fast when Mom canceled Thanksgiving because she had to focus on them. She didn't want us to see them on their way out. She wanted our last memories of them to be as their usual spry, witty selves, rather than the helpless, flailing people they'd surely become. I'm guessing she didn't want us to see her breaking either, so Max and I ended up going to Aunt Dottie's for Thanksgiving. Mom hadn't talked to Aunt Dottie in years. She wasn't technically family. She had been married to my mom's brother before he died, but she was all Mom had besides us, Nana and Pop. Desperate times, desperate measures, I guess. We hadn't seen Aunt Dottie in 10 years, since I was in kindergarten, and Max was barely forming coherent sentences. We hadn't even heard about her again until Nana and Pop got sick, but we still knew her mousy face and crooked smile the second we saw her waiting at the train station. We rode back to her house, a nondescript mass of wood and brick in the middle of nowhere, in the most awkward, protracted silence ever. She didn't want to hear about Mom or Nana or Pop, and she glared at me and Max when we tried to just talk to each other. None of that mattered once we got to her house, though. The smell of sweet potatoes and pumpkin pie filled the air. A massive golden turkey sat waiting for us. There was way more food than the three of us could ever hope to eat, even if I went for a personal record on turkey consumption, which I fully intended to do. It was as close to perfect as this holiday could be without Mom, Nana, and Pop to share it with. I reached for a roll to get started, but Aunt Dottie slapped my hand and pushed me away from the table. "Not without your cousin," she said. "He's downstairs." I didn't even know we had a cousin, but I wasn't going to ask questions if doing whatever she said meant I could start gorging myself on that meal. I thought it was a little weird, since there were only 2 places at the table, but I figured maybe she'd forgotten about me and Max and needed to get the table set for us while we were getting our cousin. The only light in the basement was coming from behind me and Max on the way down through the door at the top of the stairs. I couldn't even see the bottom of the stairs, since the angle of the doorway created a sharp divide between light and dark halfway down. I found a light switch as I groped along the wall, but it didn't do anything. The basement was pitch black, and it stayed that way no matter how many times I flicked that switch back and forth. I figured Aunt Dottie must have been mistaken. There was no way my cousin was down there. There was no way anything was down there. I started back up the stairs, dragging Max behind me. But Aunt Dottie was waiting at the top of the stairs, with her foot tapping and her head shaking. "Did you get your cousin?" she asked. I shook my head, and she stared me down, pointed toward the darkness below. I started to respond, but her glare told me to shut the hell up. So I did. I could tell Max was scared as he followed me back downstairs. He didn't say anything, not that he ever did, but his breathing was unmistakably close to a whimper. "Hello," I called out. "Your mom said we needed to bring you upstairs for dinner." The door upstairs slammed shut, and the little bit of light we'd left behind us was gone. Max gave up on masking his fear, his sobs and sniffles echoing in the darkness. "I'm scared," he said. "Let's go back upstairs." "It's okay, Max," I said. "We just need to find our cousin, and we can go back upstairs and start eating." The meal waiting for us was calling out to me, its aromas filling the air, even in that dark basement. "Hello," Max called out, clearly as eager to get out of the basement as was I. Probably not for the same reasons, though. "We have to play a game before dinner," a voice said. It was strained and uncomfortable, like the person behind it wasn't quite sure of how to string words together. "Let's play upstairs," I suggested. "We have to play a game." A pair of eyes came out of nowhere across the basement, dull yellow, breaking through the darkness. Max jumped back with a startled yelp, and I can't say for sure that I didn't do the same. "Are you our cousin?" I asked. The eyes moved slowly up and down in what I assumed was a nod. Then they crept towards us, and I had all I could to hold Max in place as the smells of Thanksgiving were replaced by a putrid odor so dense I nearly threw up on the spot. "Are you ready to play?" he asked. I nodded, still unable to see anything more than the yellow eyes. "What are we going to play?" I asked. "Feast." "Like what your mom has upstairs?" I asked. The eyes moved up and down again, and a guttural noise escaped from my cousin, somewhere between a hack and a laugh.
Then he put his face right against mine, sniffing the air around me. I felt a cold hand press against my cheek, force my head to the side. Then I felt what seemed like wet sandpaper scrape from my jaw to my cheek. His tongue. I tried to shove him away, but his grip was too tight for me to get away. So I just stood there, shaking and crying, my hand wrapped around Max's. My cousin backed away from me, took a step to the side, took a step toward Max. "Leave him alone," I said, the words coming out far closer to those of a scared child than the protective big brother I wanted to be. Max choked on his tears as the eyes moved towards him, as my cousin sniffed at the air around him and licked his cheek. I wanted to stop my cousin, to fight back, but I was too scared to move. "This one," my cousin said. Then Max was yanked from my grip, a quick scream silenced almost instantly with a thunderous thud on the concrete floor. I finally built up the nerve to lunge at my cousin, but I was on my back, my head spinning before I could even process what I was going to do. Those yellow eyes seemed to look down at me, unblinking. "This one," he said again. Then he disappeared into the basement, dragging Max behind him. I tried to reach for Max. I tried to call out for him, but I felt myself moved away from the darkness, moving toward the stairs. "You found your cousin," Aunt Dottie said, as she dragged me out of the basement and into the living room. She propped me in a chair in front of one of the 2 place settings on the table, an overflowing plate of turkey and sweet potato and cranberry sauce, and so much more food waiting for me. "Aren't you going to eat?" she asked. "Your mother said Thanksgiving was your favorite holiday, and I went to a lot of trouble to put this together for you." I couldn't respond. I couldn't react. I was numb. "He has his feast," she said, as she slipped a forkful of turkey toward my mouth. "Now you can have yours." And I did.
Some people wonder how I got away with the things I did. There was one patient I hated and was happy to see gone. This patient was so horrible that when it was over, every doctor had a new respect for me. Looking back, in a way, I feel guilty, like maybe they were suffering, but at the time, I couldn't stand them. December 29th, 1971, she entered the asylum. Everyone knew about her because she was all over the news. She had been arrested for literally eating someone alive. Not like their face or just a little nibble on their arm. No, she tore someone's abdomen open and began to eat everything raw. No one wanted to work with her. Nurses went in with a security guard and never turned their back on her. For the first few weeks, a gag was placed over her mouth, and she would be tied down. There was no taking a risk this time. Honestly, I don't think the doctors knew what they were going to do with her when they took her in. After a month, they finally figured it out. They wanted her to start working on eating real human food. They wanted to figure out what was wrong with her, so I was put in charge of feeding her. I was supposed to feed her different dishes and record if she liked one or the other better or worse. Damn it, she freaks me out. I sat down in the chair in the head doctor's office. Bill, we need you now more than ever. If you do this, I will be grateful forever. If we can cure cannibalism, just think, we're unstoppable. At this point, I was still naive and bought into this ridiculous lie. Truth was, this was the first patient I think no one could do anything for. Not because her insanity was too bad, but because, honestly, she seemed completely and totally sane, besides the flesh-eating bit. My first encounter with her was simple. She surprised me because I was expecting a totally insane monster frothing at the mouth like a dog and barking at the entrance. Instead, she had brown eyes, short blonde hair, but it was curled up at the ends. She had clear skin and was pleasing to the eye. Her body was slim, but she was almost athletic looking. She did not look like someone who would do what she did. A guard was standing beside me to keep me safe, his hand always on his gun, ready to pull it out. Beth, I have been told to start making your meals to help you learn what good food is again. This is roast chicken with couscous, and I made you broccoli with a creamy cheese sauce. It's simple but very good. It did not take long. She grabbed the plate and began eating politely. This is very good, Doctor. I do enjoy the roast. Did you add rosemary? I do taste a hint of honey glaze as well. This unnerved me. There's nothing worse than a patient who is perfectly normal. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For some reason, my fight-or-flight response was kicking in. I'm not a doctor. Just call me Bill. And yes, it's honey glazed. I stuffed it with rosemary and some other spices, I said quickly. She continued eating slowly, while staring at me and the guard the whole time. When done, she handed the plate to me and stood up. Good day, Beth. I'll be back tomorrow with another meal. I never turned my back on her, and when I left and shut the door, I felt the hand of the guard on my back. Relax, Bill. You're going to be fine. A few days went by with nothing eventful happening. Then the weekend came and went. On Monday, I decided to cook a sausage. I'm not big on sausage. They tend to give me heartburn, and I've never been a fan of the amount of sodium in them. I was told to be diverse, though, and try to introduce as many foods as possible. So far, she loved everything, and while this might seem like a compliment, I was starting to think it was a problem. The sausage was served with caramelized onions, carrots, beets, and peppers. I walked into her room, served her, and observed. She began to eat the sausage first, looking at me the whole time. She didn't use the knife this time. She just picked it up with her fork, her eyes darting towards my regions, and she bit down hard on the sausage, making a crunching noise. Very good, Bill, she said, chewing, a bit of the juice dripping down her face, but she didn't wipe it away. How did you know sausage is my favorite? They say the lining is made of intestine, but who can tell the way you cook them? She darted a glance at the guard, whose hand was always on the gun. When she was finished, I actually sprinted out, not saying goodbye. As we left, I walked a bit with the guard, then stopped in the middle of the hall and turned to him. "What just happened?" I needed a minute to process. The guard chuckled a bit. "I think she wants you." He tried to joke, but I gave him a glance. "The worst thing is, she doesn't deny anything. She is in total control over all of us right now. We all fear her, and that is her issue. She's controlling, and she gets unique meals every day from me. She gets special treatment from the doctors who don't want to give her standard treatment. She doesn't know what suffer." The guard whipped out his gun, pointing it behind me. I turned around and saw Beth in the hall, walking towards us. Even though his gun was out, she continued forward. "Stop!" the guard screamed at her. She finally halted. "The door was unlocked. I figured I'd come out and let you all know," she said in a sweet and innocent-sounding voice. "There's no way. I locked it behind me. I swear to God, I know I did," I said out loud. She looked at me and laughed, the kind of laugh that echoes in the hall and bounces back to send chills up your spine. "No, it was unlocked, Bill." I don't know what kind of demon spawn she was, but I knew that I locked the door. I soon realized this was her way of telling me she could leave whenever she wanted. We brought her back to her room, and I made certain I locked it again. The guard looked at me as we walked away. We were both pale as ghosts on a winter night. "Bill, I saw you lock that door." We both made our way down the hall. "She's a witch, or a demon, I swear," I responded, and then we said goodbye and left for the day. Every moment was always leading up to when I went to her room. My nerves bothered me all day, and I was having problems sleeping and eating. I was actually, for the first time, thinking of quitting. Something about me feared entering her room or walking by. For a month, life went on like this in the asylum. I would bring her food. She would love every piece, and she would show us her power by dark glances and long stares. One day, she tested her boundaries. "Bill, tomorrow I want steak, but make it rare and give me sweet potatoes with gravy using the steak juice. Add chives to the potatoes on the top." I scoffed at her challenge. "That's not on the menu tomorrow," I responded. She gave me a look that I can only describe as pure horror. It was not angry, but one that simply stated she was able to unlock doors. What's to say she couldn't find me and eat me instead? The worst part was, I found myself saying, "But I think we can arrange something." Things were getting out of control at this point. I went to the head doctor and explained she loved every dish, and she was now dictating what she wanted next. "So, don't give her that, Bill. Give her a grilled cheese, something sloppy. See what she does." I wasn't in the business of doing what the doctors did. They always did stupid things just to see what a patient's reactions were. Beth was different though, right? She was a monster inside and was waiting for the right moment to rip me and the guard up. So I realized this could be the thing that would show her we were in charge, not her. The cop had a gun, so if things went wrong, we were safe. The next day, I entered her room with a grilled cheese, sat the plate down in front of her, and she smiled. "A joke. How cute. I'm sure my steak is next, presumably. She looked up at me with a smirk on her face. It began to drain when she saw I was smiling back, as if we were having a chess match. She looked at the guard, who still had his hand on his gun, then at me. I wonder, what if that gun isn't loaded? What if there's no round in the chamber, or the bullets are blanks? She stared at the guard. At first, he didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning. That unlocked door, there's no way she could. He pulled the gun out and unloaded the firearm to check and make sure he had the bullets. I've never seen a human this quick, so I will break it down slowly. Beth slammed her fists on the table, breaking the plate apart, grabbed a shard, and jumped for the guard's neck. The guard dropped the gun, and the shard pierced his neck in the artery. Blood spurted out and splashed on her face. She grabbed his gun, pointed it at me, and made for the door. I walked with her, and we got to the window which had a fire escape. She told me to go down it, and we were going down to get my car and drive. I slowly descended down the stairs. She was behind me, pointing that gun. I thought quickly and pretended to twist my ankle, but it was no match for her. She pushed me against the edge, and I looked down at the 20-foot or so drop. I was being shoved over the edge, and I could feel the rusty metal of the old rickety fire escape beginning to bend. Do you want to die today, Bill? Let me remind you, I don't want to kill you. I want you as my personal cook, so why die here? Terror overcame me, and I just did as she asked me from here. We made it to my car, and she laid in the back as I got to the guard's gate. I could see her tensing up. Everything okay, Bill? You look pale. I opened my mouth to respond, but was greeted by a loud bang as Beth shot the guard dead between the eyes. Drive! She screamed, pointing the gun to my head. I sped off, my ears ringing loudly. I've never felt so much stress in my body. I was shaking, unsure where to go or where to turn, but I just kept driving. Where? I asked, feeling the warm gun that had just been fired on my neck. Your house, Bill. Cook a meal for me, Bill. My heart sank. My wife was at home, and I knew she would become the real meal. If I didn't do something quick, I didn't know what else to do, so I drove to a friend's home. I had to protect my wife. I knew this friend had guns. He was a Vietnam vet and would be smart enough to do something. I know that sounds horrible, using a vet to save my life, but it was the only thing I could think of. We got out of the car, and I walked to the house. Unfortunately, it was locked, but the hot gun on my neck made me knock as hard as I could. Open the door. It's Bill, your roommate. I was hoping this would set him on edge. This should have been her first tip-off that it wasn't my house. I should have the keys, but I'm so glad she never guessed that. I saw the light upstairs turn on, someone fumbling with the door, and then opening it to see a girl pointing a gun at him. I have to say this part was terrifying. Yet to this day, I am all too happy for this Marine. He brought me and her in, and we sat on his couch, the girl standing and pointing the gun at him and me. So now what, little lady? So you're smart enough to know how to use the gun? So you'll kill me and my friend here, no doubt. Then what? he said with a smug smile.
I'm going to eat you alive. First your tongue, since you won't shut up. Then I'll rip open your stomach. I'll eat your kidney right in front of your eyes, while it's still warm.
That's when he laughed and held his hand up. He had no fingernails, and there were scars on each finger where someone had pried them off.
Sweetheart, I was a prisoner of war. All you can do is end my suffering.
This was the moment he was waiting for. She ran at him, gun held high to pistol whip him. He grabbed her hand. A shot was fired at the ceiling. Then he slammed his fist right into her pelvis, and she doubled over, dropping the gun, and he grabbed her by the neck and broke it. It was over. I began to weep as I covered my face, shaking uncontrollably. My friend dropped the girl and looked at me at what he had just done. He was now rationalizing in his head how it was an okay kill and how he wouldn't be in trouble. He picked up the phone and called the police, and I was taken to a hospital. I was given time to recover, but I was so shaken up. The guard who had been stabbed never had a chance to live. I was lucky for my friend's training and quick thinking. I still don't know what could have cured her, or what was mentally wrong with that girl, but there was no one in that asylum that was more frightening than her. To this day, I still have dreams of her, but it's something me and my friend have in common. I still feel guilty. I feel like maybe if I had given her what she had wanted, the doctors would have figured something out. But then again, I've learned over the years not to trust those doctors, so I'm not sure they would have found a cure. She wanted to keep me alive, to be her personal chef. I ask myself sometimes, what if my friend hadn't stepped in? What if...